Welcome back. Moving right along, let's take a look at the next core discipline, which is adaptive. This is the term that I'm using in place of the emotional domain in the more conventional early childhood development system. The first subdivision is visual arts. As a species, we can point to one biological innovation or another, be it opposable thumbs, big brains, use of tools, or social cooperation, as a hallmark of why we are able to live all over this planet, even in extreme environments. But adaptation from our more primitive form into the highly specialized creatures that we are today really stemmed from our command of a complex inner world and ability to use emotional intelligence and memory. Memory is not just as simple as a digital file storage system where you send out a query and pull up the correlating incident. We can only retrieve experiences as effectively as we have made emotional connections with them. We know that music, color, and smell in particular form really strong associations in our brains. So I use this kind of odd term here in the subdivision, visual art, to distinguish it from the more applied tactile craftsmanship type arts. For me, in my digital painting experience, 2D art can be more about getting your ideas down than necessarily conveying them to other people. Of course, this can be a desired outcome that you have, but I don't think that the process is squarely featured under communication for this reason. Think of it like recording dreams, taking a snapshot of your mind. And I think that gets more to the heart of the struggle that people cultivating art skills often have. They wish that they could just will it into being, this picture that they have in their head, as all of the technical elements of recreating the image really get in the way. And I think that this is a strong case that it's actually a more emotional experience overall than a technical one. Of course, a lot of technical elements go into the ability to do it well and efficiently, but the drive to create art and music comes from an emotionally rooted place, and therefore taps into the individual's ability to interpret and regulate their own emotions. This becomes painfully apparent with issues like creative block or frustrations with being able to create art, because it can take an intense internal fortitude and organization to be able to do the very thing which cultivates that. It's a catch-22 and a cruel one. But our ancestors were able to art enough, basically, which we see evidence of in cave paintings. You think that creating art these days is difficult with all of our fancy tablets and gizmos and software. How awkward did that have to be for the brave cavemen getting art critiqued by torchlight in these fragile social groups that they couldn't just delete the comments of and walk away from? But that proto-art fairly soon after was developed into pictograms and eventually systems of writing. So the more that we do these activities, the farther and farther we change the physical scape of our brains to become a more sophisticated species. So this core of our brain, which is stimulated by the production of art, music, and formation of memories, that's what we're really talking about here. And so therefore, we're also kind of talking about plasticity itself and the ability to manage our own learning and the adaptability of our brain toward learning new things by pruning older unused synapses. So visual/auditory might be a better divider from the physical-based categories of touch and taste that we talked about already. Maybe we need a new term entirely, but this was my train of thought here. The main takeaway is that feeling happens before thought, and it can overpower it in most cases. Instinct is the key word here. And the more you exercise this portion of your brain and are able to regulate your emotions, the more clearly you can think as well and communicate. So the list of possible disciplines to develop these skills are painting, drawing, digital art, color theory, photography, textile design or repeating pattern design, illustration, calligraphy, filmmaking, animation, murals or graffiti, graphic art, photo manipulation, singing, playing instruments, music composition, although of course there's some crossover with math and things like that here. Ear training, this is very crucial regardless of what other direction you're going to take your visual or auditory art. I've been working a lot harder on this lately, and it's opened up so many more avenues for me. I didn't really think of it as something specifically that you could study, and it wasn't really introduced to me in school, so I want to highlight this one in particular for anybody that wants to learn something new that's really applicable to a lot of other areas. So, chanting, art appreciation, and the more imagination-based side of meditation, or like guided meditation, that's kind of more what I'm implying here. The next subdivision is psychology, and at first glance, this category seems really straightforward. But notice how I didn't put this in with the medical disciplines. I did this very intentionally. As the study of emotions, what I've concluded from listening to a lot of contemporary psychologists and therapists is that not only are we going about the treatment of psychological problems all wrong, but we have really allowed our cognitive faculties to overanalyze and sort of invalidate the emotions themselves. Maybe to the extent that the way we now think about them is in and of itself damaging. This is really obvious when you look at how drastically different the understanding and attitudes about them are and how they vary around the world. Quite starkly, especially between the Eastern and Western traditions. I was reminded of this again when I was reading about emotional regulation in Qigong today. That's a type of energy work. Basically, the stance was that talk therapy is more or less unnecessary, and it's certainly not what you start with or focus on. And also, it makes the point that hormone regulation is a largely physical thing rather than a chemically correctable thing. At first, it's like, wow, just throw out all of this other theory and research. How audacious. But the point is actually kind of amazing. And this is that energy is everything. Everything is energy. We regulate energy with our comfort, posture, breathing. By the time we actually notice these things, make corrections, and realize all of the things that we have been tensing, and make a conscious effort to relax, we can often forget about what we were so upset about emotionally in this process. Yes, that is a massive oversimplification, but what it's trying to say is do all of that first. Make sure that you have made all of the physical corrections that you can first before turning to anything else, because A, you're minimizing the damage that your emotions may be having to your physical body in the form of stress and secretions, and creating more overall wellness. And B, even if something else does work for you later on, you still do need to do these things to survive. Things like, before you pop a painkiller, have you actually drank any water today? You know, ask yourself the real questions here. Is it so much that you need one, or are you gonna feel better coincidentally because you are gonna drink water to swallow the pill? Just go down the checklist first. It can't hurt. And you don't know necessarily how much vitality you may be actually preserving by taking better care of yourself in this way. Try it right now. I read this book and it made me do it, and I felt kind of dumb because I noticed that I was really tensing. So, how are you sitting? Are you slouching? Are you breathing with your belly? Or shallowly with your shoulders? Is your jaw clenched? How about your butt cheeks? I know, it's a weird one, but sometimes you notice you're really clamped down for no reason. It's amazing what you'll actually find if you catch yourself. My biggest offender is the scrunchy eyebrows. I always wonder why my face hurts. And it's like, oh, well, maybe my permanent disapproving dad face has something to do with it. So, little side lecture there, but maybe somebody needed to hear that today. I was mad when I read that again, and I had to check myself because I had to think, was my conditioning inhibiting my intake of new information that didn't click with the conventional wisdom? So, this is exactly what the practice of psychology in this instance truly is. It's the questioning of perceived social norms against the internal emotion regulation and personal convictions that we hold, and our ability to stand our ground against outside influences, basically. It's the more structured side of self-awareness. It has not so much to do with expressing the inner world as it does with preserving it, right? So, the list that I've compiled for the practices is symbolism, behaviorism, psychoanalysis, introspection, dream interpretation, personality study, philosophy, as I will introduce at length later, but basically the Alexandrian school of thought incorporated ideas from the three main pillars: Stoicism, Neoplatonism, or regular Platonism. I'm not a big fan of the neo tag for anything, and Epicureanism. So we'll go over that way more later. But the basic implication here is that philosophy and psychology, from how much I've studied both of them, are really deeply connected. And oftentimes philosophy is stuck under the more cognitive areas of study. But you can practice philosophy just by thinking to yourself, whereas, the other applied sciences are really built upon a legacy of either existing research or current observations that you're having, rather than just sitting and conversing with your inner world and your experience. So, further practices of philosophy then, premeditation of misfortune, which is a hallmark of Stoicism, affirmations, examination of conscience, philanthropy or agape, which is love of humanity, basically love of your neighbor. Spirituality, that's kind of a catch-all term, a little bit of a throwaway here, but basically contemplation of the possibility of a higher order to things, as differentiated from organized religion. Theorem, evaluation of desire, and first principles thinking. So these are the divisions within the adaptation sphere of experience. And on we go to the next of the core disciplines. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.